In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon His last and beloved Messenger Muhammad, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. The title of this presentation is The Resurrection of the Dead in Pictures. Now this topic shows the greatest sign of the Quran, and the Quran is the last revelation of Allah God to people. And this sign is the detailed scientific mechanism for how Allah will bring back the dead on the Day of Judgment. Now the reason why this sign is the greatest sign of the Quran is because no human, regardless of how clever he or she is, can even attempt to imagine how the dead will be brought back to life. So if the Quran shows this knowledge, I mean the scientific mechanism for the resurrection of the dead, then this means that the Quran is surely from Allah God. So this sign testifies that the Quran is from Allah God, and that Muhammad is His messenger. The detailed mechanism for how Allah God will bring the dead back to life is given in the Quran in chapter 35, verse 9, which reads, "And it is Allah God who sends the winds so that they excite the clouds, and Allah God drives them to a dead land, and revives therewith the earth after its death, as such the resurrection." So pondering upon this verse, we realize that Allah God is explaining to us the stages involved in reviving a dead land, i.e., a land without vegetation, where He states, "And it is Allah God who sends the winds so that they excite the clouds, and Allah God drives them to a dead land, and revives therewith the earth after its death." And then at the end of the verse, Allah God states that as such, i.e., exactly the same, the dead will be brought back to life. Which means that the scientific mechanism for the resurrection of the dead is exactly like the mechanism we see every day in bringing plants to life. So the way to go now is to compare the stages involved in growing plants in a dead land with that of growing people in their graves. The first stage, described in the previously mentioned Quranic verse, is Allah God sending the wind to excite the clouds, meaning causing turbulence in the air to enhance mass and energy exchange to cause cloud formation. And this can be seen by every person when he looks at clouds and the effect of the wind on them. Then Allah God drives the newly formed clouds to a dead land, meaning a land without vegetation, i.e., no living creatures. And again, this is an observed phenomenon. The next stage is Allah God causing rain to fall from the clouds, which are located hovering over a dead land. And this rain will mix with the soil. When water mixes with the soil, it dissolves the substances found in the soil, like minerals and gases, and the result is soil water, which is composed of water plus soil substances. It is interesting to note that the constituents of soil water are exactly what the plant needs to grow, as well as what the human body needs to grow. An example of this can be seen in the calcium dissolved in soil water, where it is a main substance in plants and the human body also. And also knowing that it is the mineral with the highest concentration in plants. It goes into the construction of wood material, and it is the mineral with the highest concentration in the human body. It goes into the construction of bone material. The next stage is that soil water is absorbed by plant seeds found in a dead land. Likewise, on the Day of Judgment, this water will be absorbed by what remains from the human body after burial, which is the bone found at the end of the spine. And it is interesting to note that this small bone found at the very end of the spine does not decay with time, nor is it possible to crush it, and people try to crush and incinerate it with no avail. And we can see the perfect match between the design of this bone, shown on the right, and the design of a plant seed, shown on the left. After the absorption of soil water by the plant seed and the bone at the end of the spine, the cells within them are triggered to start dividing and increase in number. And it is interesting to note that there is a perfect match between the design of the plant cell and the human cell, with all regards, like having production lines, ribosome, stored information DNA, nucleus, etc. The cells, when supplied with soil water and excitation energy, start to divide and increase in number, both within the plant seed and the bone at the end of the spine. And we can see that the pattern of cell division is identical in both plants and humans, where plant cell division can be seen on the left and that of humans is seen on the right. After the cells within the plant seed and the tailbone of humans reach a certain number, an embryo is formed where we can see on the left the clinging of the plant embryo to the inner wall of the plant seed, and in humans we see on the right the clinging of the human embryo to the inner wall of the womb, and on the day of judgment it will cling to the inner wall of the bone at the end of the spine. After the embryo reaches a certain size, it leaves the plant seed and comes out from the earth, and in the process disturbing the soil. Likewise, when the human embryo reaches a certain size, it comes out from the bone at the end of the spine, which is found in the grave, and disturbs the ground when the person emerges from the grave. As Allah God states in the Quran, in chapter 82, verse 4, which reads, "And when the graves are disturbed," the plant and human embryos continue to grow into a full-grown plant and human, and we can see a perfect match between the design of Allah God for plants and that for humans. Considering the main structural material in plants and humans, we can see on the left the design of Allah God for wood material, which is the material mainly responsible for carrying the load of the plant. And if we compare this to bone material shown on the right, which is the material mainly responsible for carrying the load on the human body, we see, glory be to Allah God, a perfect match in the design to the extent that the human eye cannot really tell which is bone and which is wood. This also highlights the point that it is as easy to Allah God to reconstruct the human body after death as easy as growing a plant from its dead seed, which is something that every person sees every day of his or her life. The figure shows another matching between the design of plants and humans, where on the left we see the design of Allah God for the two ends of a neural cell in the human body, and we see a perfect match in this design with the design of branches and roots of plants, shown on the right. On the left we see the anatomy of a plant leaf, where we see the various layers and canals supplying water and nutrients to the cells within the leaf, whereas on the right we see the various layers of the human skin and the arteries supplying the cells of the skin with blood containing water and nutrients. We also see a perfect match between the design of the layers and vessels within the plant leaf and the human skin. Another point to be mentioned here is the reason why Allah God gives the similitude between people's resurrection on the Day of Judgment and coming out from their graves, and with locusts spreading in the land, as stated in the Quran in chapter 54 verse 7, which reads, "They will come forth with humbled eyes from graves, as if they were locusts spread abroad." We can understand the wisdom behind this from pondering upon the life cycle of locust, where we find that locust egg can remain buried in the ground from 2 to 17 years, and all at a sudden locusts emerge from the ground in great numbers. One of the points to be noted here is that this small piece of locust remains in the ground for a very long period of time, like the bone at the end of the spine of humans remaining in the grave for a long period of time, with no observed change, and then when Allah God wills, with the existence of certain conditions, water being the most important, a locust is constructed within this egg, and when it leaves the egg and emerges, it disturbs the soil above it, exactly like what will happen to humans on the Day of Judgment. So now we know why Allah God gives this parable in the Quran between the resurrection of the dead and locust. We saw, brothers and sisters, in this presentation how Allah God will bring the dead back to life on the Day of Judgment in a detailed scientific manner. And one of the reasons why Allah God shows people His sign is to guide them to the Quran, which is the last revelation of Allah God to people, such that they will know how to function in this life to have happiness in this life and the hereafter. Also, as I said earlier, no human can start even to imagine the knowledge shown in this presentation, which proves that Muhammad, peace be upon him, received his knowledge from the Creator Allah God, who knows everything. And to know more about the signs of the Quran, please visit my website on www.quran-miracle.com, and you can contact me on zaidquran@gmail.com, and may the peace and blessings of Allah God be upon you all.